Imagine for a moment that you're driving through the empty streets of South Korea at 3 o'clock in the morning. The city is mostly asleep, except for the occasional night owl heading home or the early risers preparing for their day. You're a taxi driver, and you've seen it all during these late-night shifts. Drunk businessmen stumbling out of karaoke bars, young couples heading home from dates, shift workers catching rides to their early morning jobs. You think you've developed a sixth sense about people, an ability to read passengers and situations that comes from years of experience navigating the city's streets at all hours. That's exactly what one particular taxi driver was thinking when he spotted a young woman standing on the sidewalk with what appeared to be travel luggage. Nothing unusual about that, right? People travel at all hours, catch red-eye flights, take early morning trains. So he does what any professional driver would do, pulls over, steps out, pops the trunk, and offers to help with her bag. But here's where the first red flag appears, though it's so subtle he almost misses it. This girl, and she really does look like just a girl, maybe middle school or high school age, she's absolutely insistent about handling her luggage herself. "No, I'm good. Don't worry about it," she says with a polite smile. "It's not a big deal. I can do it by myself." Now, most passengers appreciate help with heavy bags, especially at 3 in the morning when they're tired. But she's determined to manage alone. The driver watches as she struggles slightly with the suitcase. This thing is clearly heavy, the kind of weight that forces her to lean forward as she drags it across the pavement, the wheels making that distinct sound of something substantial being pulled along rough concrete. But she persists, loads it into the trunk herself, closes it with a satisfying thunk, and slides into the back seat. As they're driving, the taxi driver's mind starts working overtime. He glances at her in the rearview mirror, trying to piece together the puzzle of this late-night passenger. She looks so young, so innocent, sitting there in what appears to be casual clothes. But several things aren't adding up in his experienced mind. First, the timing. 3 a.m. isn't exactly prime travel time, especially for someone who looks barely out of middle school. Second, and more puzzling, her destination. She's not asking to go to Incheon Airport, which would make sense for an international flight. She's not heading to Seoul Station for a high-speed train to another city. She's not even going to a local bus terminal or subway station. Instead, she wants to go to a park. Specifically, a grassy area near the Nakdong River, not exactly a transportation hub or a place where you'd expect someone with heavy luggage to be heading at this hour. But the driver's been doing this job long enough to know that people have their reasons, and it's not his place to judge. Maybe she's meeting someone there. Maybe she's got family camping. Maybe there's some early morning event happening. Who knows? At least she's polite and pleasant, a refreshing change from the typical 3 a.m. clientele of intoxicated businessmen who can barely give coherent directions to their homes. The drive to the park is quiet, almost peaceful. She directs him to the specific area where she wants to be dropped off, pays her fare without any fuss, and once again refuses his offer to help with the luggage. The driver watches with a mixture of curiosity and slight concern as she hauls that heavy suitcase out of his trunk, the weight clearly causing her some effort. But she manages it, gives him a polite goodbye, and starts walking toward the grassy field area of the park. Here's where the driver's instincts really kick in. Something about the whole situation feels off, though he can't put his finger on exactly what. Maybe it's the location, maybe it's the timing, maybe it's just the accumulated wisdom of years of late-night driving. But he decides to take a smoke break right there instead of immediately driving away. He's thinking practically too. What are the chances of another taxi cruising through a park at 3 in the morning? If this girl needs a ride back, she's going to have a hard time finding one. And something about her situation, a young woman alone in a remote area at this hour, just doesn't sit right with him. So he lights up a cigarette and settles in to wait, partially out of concern for her safety and partially because his gut is telling him something isn't right. 15 to 20 minutes pass. The driver is nearly finished with his cigarette when he sees a figure emerging from the park area. It's the same girl, but now something is dramatically different. That suitcase that was so heavy she could barely manage it earlier, now it's practically floating beside her as she walks. The weight difference is so dramatic that he can see it from a distance. She's not struggling at all, not leaning forward, not dragging it behind her. Instead, she's almost bouncing along, the suitcase rolling effortlessly beside her like it contains nothing but air. The whole energy surrounding her has shifted too. When she approaches his taxi and asks for a ride, there's something detached about her demeanor, almost like she's in a different mental space entirely. Most strangely, she doesn't seem to recognize him as the same driver who brought her here just 20 minutes earlier. It's as if she's completely disconnected from the recent past. During the ride back, the driver finds himself constantly glancing in the rearview mirror. His passenger seems calm, almost eerily so, but his instincts are screaming that something is fundamentally wrong with this picture. The questions keep circling in his mind. Where did she go in that park for 20 minutes? What was in that suitcase that made it so heavy on the way there and so light on the way back? Why does she seem like a completely different person now? That gut feeling, that accumulated wisdom from years of reading people and situations, was strong enough that he made a decision that would change everything. He contacted the police, and what they discovered when they searched that grassy area near the Nakdong River was absolutely horrifying. Scattered human remains, dismembered body parts that had been deliberately disposed of in an area designed to accelerate decomposition. The taxi driver had unknowingly become part of a murder case, transporting a killer and her victim's remains not once but twice in the same night. He had sat just feet away from someone who had just committed one of the most brutal crimes imaginable, someone who was calm enough to engage in polite conversation while her suitcase contained dismembered human body parts. The investigation moved with remarkable speed once the discovery was made. Using the taxi driver's detailed description of his passenger and the specific locations where he had picked her up and dropped her off, police were able to trace the crime back to its source within hours. What they found was a case that would captivate and horrify South Korea, becoming one of the most discussed criminal cases in recent memory. The person responsible was 23-year-old Tong Yu Jong, though she looked significantly younger than her actual age. The CCTV footage that emerged from the investigation became the stuff of nightmares for many who watched it. Here was someone who appeared to be a harmless teenager, practically skipping through the streets with a suitcase full of human remains. Her cute bob haircut bounced as she walked, and her entire demeanor suggested someone without a care in the world, perhaps heading out on a fun weekend trip. The disconnect between appearance and reality was so profound that it shook people to their core. This wasn't some obviously dangerous individual who looked the part of a killer. This was someone who could have been anyone's daughter, sister, or student. Someone you might bump into on the street and immediately apologize to, thinking you'd accidentally jostled a sweet young girl. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the motivation that would eventually emerge from the investigation. According to her own confession, Yu Jong committed this horrific crime for a reason that chills the blood. She simply wanted to experience what it felt like to kill another human being. Not for money, not for revenge, not in the heat of passion, but out of pure, cold curiosity about the act of murder itself. This case exploded across Korean social media and news outlets for multiple reasons. The brazenness of the crime was shocking enough. Who transports body parts via taxi in a country saturated with surveillance cameras? But the footage of Yu Jong looking so carefree and innocent while carrying out such a horrific act created a cognitive dissonance that people couldn't shake. There was something deeply unsettling about watching someone who looked like a happy teenager skipping through the streets while knowing what was actually in her suitcase. The childlike mannerisms, the bouncing bob haircut, the innocent appearance, all of it created a perfect mask for something truly monstrous underneath. As always, we want to acknowledge that this is a developing case, and we're working with the information available as of now. Things could change as more details emerge, though South Korea's privacy laws might limit how much additional information becomes public. The victim's family has chosen to remain anonymous, which we completely respect. So throughout this story, we'll be referring to her by the alias Hannah. Our Korean research team has been working tirelessly to compile all available information about this case, cross-referencing multiple sources and working to separate confirmed facts from speculation and rumors. What you're hearing today represents the most comprehensive picture we can paint with the reliable information currently available. Now, let's talk about Hannah, because her story is crucial to understanding the full scope of this tragedy. Hannah was a young woman in her 20s who had chosen to work as an English tutor for high school students. And let me tell you, if you think tutoring is a straightforward job, you've clearly never dealt with the South Korean education system. This is a country where education is taken with deadly seriousness, where parents are not just involved but completely obsessed with their children's academic success. Korean parents don't just want a tutor. They want someone who can help create the next Einstein, the next Nobel Prize winner, the next global genius who will bring honor to their family. They research tutors like they're hiring a CEO, examining credentials, transcripts, teaching methods, personality traits, everything imaginable. The competition is fierce, the expectations are impossibly high, and the pressure is constant. But Hannah genuinely loved this work. She was attending a prestigious university herself, which gave her credibility in the eyes of demanding parents, and the flexible schedule worked well with her own studies. More importantly, she had a real passion for helping students develop an interest in English. Her goal wasn't just to improve test scores. She wanted to be that cool tutor who could make learning fun and engaging, who could inspire a genuine love of the language rather than just drilling grammar rules and vocabulary lists. By 2023, the tutoring world had fully embraced the digital age. There are now platforms specifically designed to connect tutors with students and parents, functioning like a professional marketplace with built-in verification systems. Tutors upload their credentials, transcripts, test scores, teaching experience. Everything gets thoroughly vetted to ensure parents are getting legitimate, qualified educators. The platform verifies that tutors are actually enrolled in the universities they claim to attend, confirms their grades and academic standing, runs background checks, and essentially creates a comprehensive profile that gives parents confidence in their choice. On the flip side, parents can browse through hundreds of tutor profiles like they're shopping for the perfect match for their child's specific needs. The demand for English tutors was particularly robust, and the compensation reflected that demand. Hannah found herself fielding inquiries from numerous parents, each one convinced that their child needed the very best English instruction available. Among these inquiries was one from a mother who seemed unusually determined to hire Hannah specifically. When Hannah initially declined the offer because the family lived too far from her apartment, a perfectly reasonable decision since commuting time cuts into both study time and earning potential, this particular mother refused to accept no for an answer. Instead of simply moving on to another tutor, she made an offer that was hard to refuse. She would personally drive her daughter to Hannah's apartment for the tutoring sessions. Looking back, Hannah probably felt genuinely bad for this seemingly desperate mother. Maybe the daughter had crucial exams coming up. Maybe Hannah's profile was exactly what they were looking for in terms of teaching style and qualifications. Maybe other tutors had already turned them down for the same distance-related reasons. The mother's willingness to handle all the transportation logistics made the arrangement seem feasible and even considerate. Hannah was also someone who genuinely enjoyed helping students succeed. The opportunity to work with a family that seemed so committed to their daughter's education probably appealed to her desire to make a real difference in a young person's academic journey. So despite her initial reservations about the distance, she agreed to give it a try. On Friday, May 26, 2023, around dinner time, Hannah was in full preparation mode for this new tutoring relationship. She spent time organizing her apartment, making sure her teaching materials were ready, preparing lesson plans that would help her assess this new student's current level and learning style. Everything was set up for what should have been a straightforward evening of English instruction. When she heard the knock at her door that evening, Hannah looked through her peephole and saw exactly what she expected to see. A young middle school student who fit perfectly with the image she had in her mind. The girl had that typical middle school bob haircut with the ends curled outward, the kind of style that's practically uniform among Korean students that age. Her glasses made her cheeks look even rounder and more youthful, and she was wearing what appeared to be a standard school uniform. Everything about the scene screamed normal, harmless student. Hannah opened her door with a welcoming smile, ready to begin what she thought would be a productive tutoring session. There was absolutely no way she could have known that this innocent-looking middle schooler was actually 23-year-old Tong Yu Jong, who had purchased that school uniform from a thrift store specifically for this deception. Hidden beneath that carefully constructed innocent exterior was a knife, and within minutes of entering Hannah's home, Yu Jong would reveal her true, horrific intentions. The precision and brutality of what happened next would suggest to investigators and psychiatrists that this wasn't a spontaneous act of violence, but something that had been carefully planned and researched. Yu Jong's attack on Hannah was methodical and targeted. She stabbed her victim repeatedly in a very specific area of the neck, the same location over and over again, more than 20 times according to reports. This level of precision and repetition would later indicate to forensic psychiatrists that Yu Jong had done her homework, that she knew exactly where and how to attack to achieve her goal. After completing the murder, Yu Jong didn't simply flee the scene. Instead, she settled in for what can only be described as a macabre evening of playing house in her victim's home. She went through Hannah's belongings, even putting on one of Hannah's jackets and wearing it for the rest of the night. That jacket visible in all the subsequent CCTV footage, that belonged to Hannah, adding another layer of disturbing symbolism to an already horrific crime. The surveillance footage that captured Yu Jong's movements throughout that night and into the early morning hours is absolutely chilling to watch. South Korea is famous for having one of the most comprehensive CCTV networks in the world, cameras on virtually every street corner, in every building, monitoring every public space, yet Yu Jong seemed completely unbothered by this constant surveillance as she calmly went about the business of cleaning up after her crime. The footage shows her making multiple trips between Hannah's apartment and her own place, gathering supplies for what came next. She took taxis to local stores to purchase bleach, knives, trash bags, all the materials needed for dismembering and disposing of a body. The casual way she conducted these errands, wearing her victim's clothing and appearing for all the world like a normal young person running routine shopping trips, adds another layer of horror to the whole scenario. She spent the entire night and well into the early morning hours dismembering Hannah's body in the apartment. The methodical nature of this process, combined with her apparent emotional detachment from what she was doing, paints a picture of someone operating with a level of coldness that's difficult to comprehend. Once she had completed this grisly task, Yu Jong loaded portions of Hannah's remains into a suitcase and began the process that would ultimately lead to her capture. The way she moved through the streets with that suitcase, practically bouncing along like someone heading out on a fun vacation, became one of the most disturbing images to emerge from this case. Around 3 p.m, she loaded that suitcase into the taxi that started our story. Her chosen destination near the Nakdong River wasn't selected randomly, according to forensic experts who analyzed the location. The specific area she chose, with its tall grass, proximity to water, abundance of insects, and natural decomposition factors, would have accelerated the breakdown of organic material significantly. A university forensic professor who studied the case noted that if Yu Jong hadn't been caught, the remains could have become unrecognizable or even impossible to identify within just a week. The combination of environmental factors in that location would have made her crime much harder to solve if she had managed to complete her plan without detection. But Yu Jong's carefully laid plan had one critical flaw that she couldn't have anticipated: the intuitive instincts of that taxi driver. Her assumption that he wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a girl traveling with vacation luggage and a girl traveling with body parts proved to be fatally wrong. The driver's decision to contact authorities set in motion a rapid sequence of events that unraveled her entire scheme within hours. Police found the scattered remains in the park, used the driver's description and location information to identify Yu Jong, and arrested her just 5 hours later. The speed of this resolution probably saved other potential victims, given what we would later learn about Yu Jong's broader plans. When law enforcement officers first sat down to interrogate Yu Jong after her arrest, they encountered something that immediately set off alarm bells. Not panic, not distress, not the typical reactions you'd expect from someone who'd just been caught committing a horrific crime, but an almost supernatural calm. Here was a 23-year-old woman who had just been arrested in connection with human remains found scattered in a park, and she was displaying the emotional range of someone discussing the weather. This unnatural composure became even more disturbing when she began spinning her first elaborate lie with the confidence of someone who genuinely believed she could talk her way out of the situation. "Those dismembered remains you found," she told investigators matter-of-factly, "they were my baby. I delivered the child at home and killed it because I don't want to be a mother. I'm young, I was going through a psychotic break, and I killed the baby and scattered the remains." The audacity of this lie is staggering when you consider how easily it could be disproven. Any medical examiner worth their degree could determine within minutes that the remains weren't from an infant. Yu Jong's own body showed no physical evidence of recent pregnancy or childbirth, yet she delivered this fabrication with such conviction that it raises serious questions about her relationship with reality and truth. What's particularly unsettling is the calculated nature of her deception. This wasn't a panicked lie told by someone caught off guard. This was a prepared story, delivered calmly and confidently, suggesting that Yu Jong had anticipated being caught and had crafted this explanation in advance. The psychology behind choosing infanticide as her cover story is disturbing in its own right, showing a willingness to confess to killing a helpless infant rather than admit to her actual crime. When that lie inevitably crumbled under basic medical scrutiny and police identified Hannah through her ID found near the remains, Yu Jong seamlessly transitioned to story number 2 without missing a beat. Now she painted herself as merely an accomplice, rather than the primary perpetrator. "I didn't kill this girl," she insisted with the same calm conviction. "Someone else murdered her, and they hired me to dispose of the body. They promised me Hannah's identity in exchange for helping with the cleanup." This second lie reveals something fascinating and deeply disturbing about Yu Jong's psychological state. Even in the midst of fabricating an alibi, she was expressing a desire for Hannah's life and identity. Psychiatrists who analyzed her statements noted that while this was clearly false, it provided genuine insight into feelings of inadequacy, jealousy, and a desire to literally become someone else, someone more successful, more accomplished, more connected to the world. The identity theft angle becomes even more intriguing when you consider what investigators discovered about Yu Jong's viewing habits. Digital forensics revealed that she had been watching a Korean thriller called Helpless repeatedly in the weeks leading up to the murder. This film centers around a woman who systematically steals other women's identities and may herself be a killer, using charm and deception to insert herself into other people's lives. Some experts have speculated that Yu Jong was using this movie as a blueprint, not just for the crime itself, but for the alibis and explanations she would offer if caught. The parallels between the film's plot and her claims about wanting Hannah's identity are too striking to be coincidental. This suggests a level of premeditation that goes beyond just planning the murder itself. She was also planning her defense strategy. When her identity theft story also fell apart under investigation, Yu Jong attempted a third narrative: self-defense during a confrontation. She now claimed that she had killed Hannah during a fight between them. But investigators weren't buying this version either, and the logical inconsistencies were glaring. Why would you get into a physical altercation with someone you'd never met before? Why would you go through the elaborate deception of pretending to be a student seeking tutoring if you already had some kind of conflict with your victim? The rapid succession of these lies, each delivered with the same calm confidence, painted a picture of someone for whom deception was not just natural, but perhaps compulsive. Yu Jong seemed to view truth as completely malleable, something that could be shaped and reshaped to serve her immediate needs, without any regard for consistency or believability. Finally, authorities decided to bring in the one person who might be able to reach through Yu Jong's wall of deception: her grandfather, the man who had raised her from childhood. Picture this elderly gentleman rushing to the police station, his entire world collapsing as he learned that his granddaughter, his only family, the child he had raised as his own daughter, was accused of committing an unthinkable crime. Grandpa Young's arrival at the station was heartbreaking to witness, according to those present. This was a man who had devoted his life to raising this girl, who had provided for her financially and emotionally for over 2 decades, who had believed in her potential and supported her dreams. Now he was confronting the reality that she might be a cold-blooded killer. Through tears, he begged Yu Jong to tell the truth, to finally show some respect for everything he had done for her. "Just admit your sins for me," he pleaded, his voice breaking with emotion. "Do it for me and my integrity." The irony was crushing. Throughout her entire life, Yu Jong had given her grandfather nothing but worry and financial burden, while he had given her everything he had. This was literally the least she could do for him. Whether it was genuine love for her grandfather, a recognition that her lies weren't working, or simply a calculation that confession might serve her better than continued deception, Yu Jong finally admitted to the truth. She had killed Hannah, dismembered her body, and disposed of the remains. But even in confession, she offered what many consider to be the most chilling motive imaginable: pure curiosity about the experience of murder. "I just wanted to experience murder," she told investigators. "I just wanted to know what it feels like." This wasn't a crime of passion, wasn't driven by anger or revenge or financial gain. It was, according to her own words, an experiment in experiencing death from the perspective of the person causing it. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery came when investigators conducted a thorough digital forensics examination of Yu Jong's phone and online presence. What they found was something almost unprecedented in modern criminal investigations: a person who existed as virtually a ghost in our hyper-connected digital world. Yu Jong's phone contained no contacts. Not a few contacts, not just family members. Literally 0 saved phone numbers. There were no text messages, no missed calls, no voicemails, no evidence of any human communication whatsoever. Her social media presence was equally barren. No accounts, no interactions, no digital footprint that would indicate normal human relationships or social connections. In 2023, this level of digital isolation is almost impossible to achieve accidentally. We live in a world where staying connected is not just normal, but virtually unavoidable. Even the most introverted people typically have some digital traces of human contact: family members checking in, spam calls, automated messages from services they use. Yu Jong had managed to exist in complete digital silence, suggesting a level of social isolation that goes far beyond simple introversion. Her search history, however, told a very different story. While she had no interest in connecting with other human beings, she had developed an intense fascination with death and violence. Her browsing history was filled with searches for information about hiding corpses, disposing of bodies, and covering up crimes. But most prominently, she had consumed enormous quantities of true crime content, specifically documentaries and articles about murders and serial killers. This discovery led investigators and psychiatrists to explore Yu Jong's background more deeply, and what they found was a case study in extreme social isolation that had been developing for years. Born in 1999, Yu Jong had been raised primarily by her grandfather after her parents essentially disappeared from her life. The exact circumstances of her parents' absence aren't clear, but the fact that her grandfather was listed as her sole legal guardian suggests something more serious than typical busy parent syndrome. From her earliest school years, Yu Jong had displayed what former classmates described using a word that's rarely applied to children: invisible. This wasn't about being shy or quiet or introverted. Those are normal variations in childhood personality. This was about being so disconnected from human social interaction that she seemed to exist in a parallel reality from everyone around her. Classmates who were interviewed about Yu Jong's childhood painted a picture of someone who seemed to actively reject human connection. If you waved to her in the hallway, she wouldn't wave back, wouldn't smile, wouldn't even acknowledge that you existed. If you asked her a direct question in a classroom setting, she would completely ignore you unless the query came from a teacher or other authority figure, in which case she might manage a minimal yes or no while avoiding all eye contact. This behavior extended beyond school into every aspect of her social environment. Neighbors reported almost never seeing her outside her home, never observing her interacting with friends or participating in any of the normal social activities that characterize childhood and adolescence. She didn't invite friends over, didn't go to birthday parties, didn't participate in group activities or sports or any of the typical ways that young people learn to navigate social relationships. There's one particularly telling anecdote that former classmates shared about Yu Jong's relationship with social interaction. While she refused to engage in even the most basic social pleasantries with her peers, she would become unexpectedly vocal in very specific circumstances. If she was owed even a single penny in change at a convenience store, she would insist on receiving it, even though most Korean customers would simply tell the clerk to keep such a small amount to avoid the inconvenience. This detail might seem trivial, but it reveals something important about Yu Jong's psychology. She wasn't incapable of communication or assertion. She was selectively choosing when and how to engage with the world around her. She could advocate for herself when it came to material transactions, but couldn't or wouldn't engage in basic human social connection. Importantly, multiple former classmates emphasized that Yu Jong was never bullied or victimized in ways that might explain her withdrawal from social interaction. No one picked on her, excluded her, or gave her reason to retreat into isolation as a protective mechanism. Her disconnection from others seemed to be entirely self-imposed, which makes it both more puzzling and more disturbing. The image that emerges from these accounts is of someone who could somehow make herself nearly invisible in social settings. Classmates described her ability to enter a room without anyone noticing, to sit in corners where she wouldn't be observed, to move through shared spaces like a ghost. There's something almost supernatural about this level of social invisibility, especially when it's being practiced by someone so young. One detail that particularly stuck with former classmates was Yu Jong's habit of sitting behind curtains during breaks or free periods, eating snacks alone. Not hiding exactly, because you could see that someone was there, but creating a barrier between herself and the rest of the world. The image of a young person deliberately isolating herself behind a curtain while her classmates socialize normally is both sad and deeply unsettling. A professor of adolescent psychology who was interviewed about Yu Jong's case noted that her behavior represented the complete opposite of normal teenage development. Adolescence is typically characterized by intense curiosity about peers. Teenagers want to know what everyone else thinks, how they dress, what they're interested in, who they're dating. There's a natural drive to understand and connect with people your own age, because peer relationships become so central to identity formation during these years. Yu Jong displayed none of these normal developmental patterns. Instead of curiosity about others, she showed complete indifference. Instead of seeking connection, she actively avoided it. Instead of the typical teenage struggles with fitting in or standing out, she seemed to exist in a category entirely outside normal social dynamics. What makes this even more disturbing is that Yu Jong apparently put the same minimal effort into her academic work that she did into social relationships. She wasn't a high-achieving student who channeled her energy into intellectual pursuits instead of social ones. She wasn't the classic loner genius archetype. She was simply disconnected from every aspect of normal human engagement, whether social, academic, or extracurricular. Despite this complete disconnection from normal school life, Yu Jong managed to graduate from Kunyang Girls High School in 2018. But if her social isolation was concerning during her school years, it became truly alarming after graduation. At least during high school, she was forced into some minimal level of human interaction through the basic requirements of attending classes and being in the same physical space as other people. Once she graduated, even those thin threads of connection were severed. Yu Jong told her grandfather that she was studying for a government official examination, which became her excuse for spending the next 5 years essentially doing nothing productive. This wasn't uncommon in South Korea, where many young people do spend extended periods preparing for highly competitive government jobs. But Yu Jong's grandfather, being from an older generation, didn't realize that the exam she claimed to be studying for required college-level English proficiency, something she clearly lacked. This detail about English proficiency is particularly significant given what would eventually happen to Hannah. In 2017, Yu Jong had applied multiple times for a position as a golf caddy, a job that involves interacting with customers and requires basic communication skills. Her resume even claimed that she enjoyed being active and meeting other people, and really wanted to try the role. But when the golf course called her for an interview, something extraordinary happened. Despite having applied for the job and expressing interest in it, Yu Jong refused to speak at all during the interview. Not a single word. When the interviewer asked standard questions about her experience and interest in the position, she remained completely silent. The recruiter was baffled. Why would someone apply for a job and then refuse to participate in the interview process? When Yu Jong was inevitably rejected for the position, her reaction revealed another facet of her disturbed psychology. She called the golf course back, furious about the rejection, and demanding to know why she hadn't been hired. The recruiters didn't want to say, "Because you acted completely bizarre and wouldn't answer our questions." So they gave her a diplomatic explanation about needing English-speaking staff. This rejection and the reason given for it may have planted the seeds of resentment toward people who were proficient in English, people exactly like Hannah. Yu Jong's victim was everything she was not: successful, accomplished, university educated, socially connected, and skilled in the very area where Yu Jong had been found lacking. The more investigators learned about Yu Jong's background, the more her crime began to look less like a random act of violence and more like the targeting of someone who represented everything she couldn't be or have. Hannah wasn't just a convenient victim, she was a symbol of the kind of life and success that was completely beyond Yu Jong's reach. Yu Jong's case has drawn comparisons to the Japanese phenomenon known as hikikomori, though experts are careful to note that she doesn't fit perfectly into this category. Hikikomori refers to severe social withdrawal, typically affecting adolescents and young adults who retreat into their homes and avoid all social contact for months or years at a time. The Japanese government estimates that there are over 1 million hikikomori in Japan alone, with similar numbers suspected in South Korea and potentially millions more in China. This isn't just about being introverted or preferring solitude, it's about complete withdrawal from society, education, employment, and even family relationships. Many hikikomori coordinate their movements within their own homes to avoid encountering family members, some going years without seeing anyone outside their immediate household. The Japanese government has actually published guides for hikikomori on how to handle situations like their parents dying, because there have been cases where someone's mother passed away in the house and they didn't report it or seek help. The phenomenon has become so widespread that some families hire young women to try to coax their withdrawn sons out of their rooms, and there are specialized services designed to help reintegrate hikikomori into society. It's a heartbreaking situation that affects millions of people and their families. While Yu Jong shared the extreme social isolation characteristic of hikikomori, there are important differences. Most significantly, Hikikomori are typically non-violent people whose withdrawal from society hurts primarily themselves and their families. They're dealing with depression, anxiety, and overwhelming pressure from modern work culture, but they're not dangerous to others. Yu Jong's ability to leave her home when it served her purposes, like going for walks in the park or conducting the activities related to her crime, also distinguishes her from classic hikikomori, who often become unable to leave their rooms even when they want to. Her isolation seemed more selective and purposeful rather than the result of overwhelming anxiety or depression. The technology aspect of modern hikikomori is particularly relevant to understanding Yu Jong's case. With high-speed internet, food delivery services, and online entertainment, it's now possible to meet all your basic needs without ever leaving your room or interacting with another human being. This is especially true in countries like South Korea, where delivery infrastructure is so advanced that you can have almost anything brought to your door within hours. But while hikikomori typically use technology to maintain some level of human connection, even if it's anonymous or online, Yu Jong seemed to have deliberately severed even these digital ties. Her complete lack of any electronic communication suggests an even more extreme level of isolation than what most hikikomori experience. Yu Jong's primary relationship with technology appeared to be through consuming true crime content, and this is where her case takes an even darker turn. Unlike most true crime enthusiasts who are drawn to these stories out of curiosity about human nature, a desire to understand criminal behavior for safety reasons, or interest in justice for victims, Yu Jong seemed to be consuming this content with a very different purpose in mind. According to investigators and the psychiatrists who evaluated her, Yu Jong wasn't interested in the victims' stories, the investigative process, or the pursuit of justice. She wasn't watching documentaries about wrongful convictions or unsolved cases that needed public attention. Instead, she was fixated specifically on the killers themselves, trying to understand what they experienced during the act of murder. This distinction is crucial because it reveals something about Yu Jong's fundamental relationship with other human beings. Most people who consume true crime content are doing so from a place of empathy. They want to understand victims' experiences. They want to see justice served. They want to learn how to protect themselves and others from similar harm. Yu Jong's consumption pattern suggests the complete opposite, a lack of empathy for victims and a fascination with the perpetrator's experiences. Her digital footprint showed searches for practical information about committing and concealing crimes, how to hide bodies, how to dispose of evidence, how to avoid detection. This wasn't academic curiosity about forensic science or criminal justice. This was research for practical application. She was essentially using true crime content as an instruction manual, rather than entertainment or education. The question of whether her true crime obsession actually motivated her to kill has become a subject of intense debate among experts. Some psychiatrists have suggested that her entire narrative about being inspired by documentaries might itself be a lie, designed to provide a socially acceptable explanation for an inexplicable act of violence. After all, it's easier for society to accept true crime media made her do it than to confront the possibility that some people are simply dangerous for reasons we can't understand or categorize. The media influence explanation provides a sense of control. If we can identify and limit certain types of content, maybe we can prevent similar crimes in the future. But this theory falls apart when you consider that millions of people consume the same content without ever harming anyone. The vast majority of true crime enthusiasts are nonviolent people who channel their interest into productive activities like advocating for victims, supporting criminal justice reform, or simply satisfying intellectual curiosity about human behavior. What made Yu Jong different wasn't necessarily what she was consuming, but how her already disturbed psychology interpreted and processed that content. Someone with normal empathy and social connections might watch a documentary about a serial killer and think about the victims, the families affected, the investigative process, or the societal factors that contributed to the crimes. Yu Jong apparently watched the same content and thought, I wonder what that feels like to do. This distinction points to something much more fundamental and disturbing about Yu Jong's psychological makeup. Her complete disconnection from normal human relationships may have prevented her from developing the empathy and emotional connections that keep most people from viewing others as objects for experimentation. When your only relationship with humanity is through media consumption rather than real personal connections, perhaps other people start to seem less real, less deserving of basic human consideration. If your understanding of human experience comes primarily from documentaries and news reports rather than actual relationships, maybe the line between observing violence and participating in it becomes blurred. The planning that went into Yu Jong's crime also suggests that her true crime consumption was indeed serving as education rather than entertainment. She knew to target a specific area of the neck for maximum effectiveness. She had researched disposal methods and chosen a location specifically designed to accelerate decomposition. She had prepared alibis and cover stories in advance. This level of premeditation, combined with her apparent emotional detachment from the act itself, paints a picture of someone who approached murder like a research project rather than an emotional crisis. She wanted to know what killing felt like, so she designed an experiment to find out, with Hannah serving as her unwilling test subject. According to her own confession, Yu Jong had been planning this crime since February 2023, giving her 3 to 4 months to research, prepare, and select her target. This timeline suggests that her true crime consumption during this period was specifically focused on practical preparation rather than casual interest. The fact that she spent months planning also raises the disturbing question of how many other potential victims she might have considered or contacted before settling on Hannah. Evidence would later suggest that Hannah wasn't her only target. Yu Jong had apparently been reaching out to multiple tutors through the same platform, suggesting a systematic approach to finding the right victim for her purposes. The unraveling of Yu Jong's elaborate web of deceptions began in earnest once her grandfather's emotional appeal convinced her to abandon her string of lies and admit to the truth. But even in confession, Yu Jong's behavior continued to disturb everyone involved in the case. Her stated motivation, that she simply wanted to experience what it felt like to kill another human being, represented perhaps the most chilling motive imaginable for such a brutal crime. "I just wanted to experience murder," she told investigators, with the same calm demeanor she had maintained throughout her previous lies. "I just wanted to know what it feels like." These words, delivered without apparent emotion or remorse, would become the defining statement of her case and would haunt everyone who heard them. The confession also revealed the extensive timeline of her planning. Yu Jong admitted that she had been preparing for this crime since February 2023, meaning she had spent 3 to 4 months methodically researching, planning, and working toward the goal of committing murder. This wasn't a spontaneous act of violence or a moment of mental breakdown. It was a carefully orchestrated experiment in experiencing death from the perspective of the killer. With her confession and the overwhelming physical evidence collected from the crime scene, Hannah's apartment, and the disposal site, prosecutors moved forward with formal charges. Yu Jong was officially charged with murder, defiling a corpse, dismemberment, and abandonment of human remains. Each charge carried significant prison time, and the combination suggested that Yu Jong would be facing decades behind bars if convicted. But Yu Jong's public behavior during the legal proceedings continued to demonstrate the same disturbing disconnection from normal human emotion that had characterized her throughout the investigation. Her first major public appearance came on June 2nd, when she was scheduled to appear before prosecutors and face questions from the media that had been following her case obsessively. The statement she delivered to the assembled reporters and cameras seemed carefully rehearsed rather than genuinely remorseful. "I was out of my mind," she said, her voice steady and controlled. "I didn't have my right mind. I'm sorry for the victim's family." She concluded her brief remarks by saying, "Thank you," a detail that immediately struck criminal psychology experts as significant and disturbing. According to professionals who have studied criminal behavior and media interactions, many killers in Korean documentaries and news coverage end their press conferences or public statements with a polite thank you. Yu Jong's delivery of this phrase felt copied rather than natural, as if she had studied how other criminals behaved in similar situations and was mimicking their approach rather than expressing genuine emotion. This observation feeds into a broader concern among experts about Yu Jong's relationship with truth and authentic emotion. Throughout her interactions with law enforcement, legal professionals, and the media, she consistently seemed to be performing rather than genuinely experiencing the emotions that would be normal in her situation. The public reaction to her media appearance was swift and overwhelmingly negative. Netizens across South Korea criticized what they perceived as a calculated attempt to appear sympathetic and remorseful in order to influence her eventual sentencing. Many pointed to her youthful appearance and childlike mannerisms as tools she was deliberately employing to garner sympathy from judges and the public. The concern was that Yu Jong was leveraging her innocent appearance, the same appearance that had allowed her to deceive Hannah and carry out her crime undetected, to try to minimize the consequences of her actions. Her round cheeks, glasses, and bob haircut made her look significantly younger than her actual age, and critics worried that this physical presentation might influence how harshly she would be punished. Ironically, the high-profile nature of Yu Jong's case might actually work against any attempt to receive lenient treatment. The intense media coverage and public interest in the case created pressure on authorities to demonstrate that the justice system takes such crimes seriously, regardless of the perpetrator's appearance or apparent age. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the reports emerging from those who had contact with Yu Jong while she was in custody awaiting trial. According to law enforcement officials, she was adapting to jail life remarkably well. Too well, in fact. She was reportedly calm, eating well, sleeping well, and showing no signs of the anxiety, remorse, or distress that would be normal for someone in her situation. This information sparked another wave of public outrage, but it also led to an interesting side controversy that revealed something about South Korean society's relationship with criminal justice. Angry netizens began investigating the conditions in Korean jails and discovered that prisoners were apparently eating better than members of the military during their mandatory service. The prison menu that emerged from this investigation included high-quality meals with fresh vegetables, multiple course options, and even dessert selections. Many citizens were outraged to discover that their tax money was providing such comfortable conditions for convicted criminals, while young men serving their country in the military were receiving lower quality food and accommodations. While this debate about prison conditions was interesting in its own right, the more significant issue was what Yu Jong's apparent comfort in jail revealed about her psychological state. Most people facing serious criminal charges experience significant stress, anxiety, and emotional turmoil. The fact that Yu Jong seemed completely unaffected by her circumstances suggested either an extraordinary level of emotional detachment or a fundamental inability to process the gravity of her situation. 4 days after her media appearance, the results of Yu Jong's psychological evaluation were released, providing perhaps the most scientific insight into her mental state that would be available to the public. She had been administered the Hare Psychopathy Checklist, a diagnostic tool created by Canadian psychologist Dr. Robert Hare in the 1970s. The Hare Psychopathy Checklist is considered one of the most reliable predictors of violent criminal behavior currently available to mental health professionals. It consists of 20 questions designed to assess various personality traits and behavioral patterns associated with psychopathy, with responses scored on a scale from 0 to 40 points. Normal, mentally healthy individuals typically score in the range of 5 to 6 points on this assessment. The threshold for a diagnosis of psychopathy is generally considered to be 25 points, meaning that scores above this level indicate a very high likelihood of psychopathic personality traits. The questions cover areas like empathy, remorse, manipulation, impulsivity, and relationships with others. Yu Jong's first evaluation produced a score of 15 points, higher than the normal range, but still below the threshold for psychopathy. However, when she was reevaluated just one day later on June 7th, her score jumped dramatically to 28 points, placing her firmly in the psychopathic range and above several notorious serial killers. To put this score in perspective, Ted Bundy, one of the most infamous serial killers in American history, scored 39 out of 40 points on the same assessment. John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown who murdered at least 33 people, scored 27 points. Yu Jong's score of 28 points placed her 1 point higher than Gacy and in the same range as Yu Young-chol, a notorious Korean serial killer who kidnapped and murdered 8 women. The dramatic increase in Yu Jong's score between her first and second evaluations raises important questions about the reliability of her responses and her potential for manipulation. Some experts suggested that she might have deliberately answered questions differently on the second assessment, either to appear more or less psychopathic depending on what she thought would serve her legal interests. Others pointed to the score increase as evidence of Yu Jong's fundamental instability and potential for escalating dangerous behavior. The fact that she could present so differently on consecutive days suggested someone whose psychological state was either highly variable or deliberately deceptive. Regardless of the specific reliability of the test scores, the consensus among mental health professionals was clear. Yu Jong displayed significant abnormalities in her psychological makeup that set her apart from both normal individuals and typical criminal defendants. Whether these abnormalities constituted diagnosable psychopathy or represented some other form of personality disorder, they clearly contributed to her ability to commit such a brutal crime without apparent remorse. The investigation also revealed evidence that Hannah had not been Yu Jong's only intended target. Police discovered that she had been contacting multiple English tutors through the same platform Hannah had used, suggesting a systematic approach to finding potential victims rather than a single, isolated incident. This discovery led criminal psychology experts to conclude that Yu Jong would almost certainly have killed again if she hadn't been caught after her first murder. Professor Yu Sung-ho, a specialist in criminal psychology, stated publicly that there was nearly a 100% chance that Yu Jong would have continued killing if her initial crime had gone undetected. The systematic nature of her victim selection also suggested a level of planning and premeditation that went beyond what was initially apparent. Yu Jong hadn't simply decided to kill Hannah specifically, she had decided to kill an English tutor and had been systematically identifying and contacting potential targets until she found one who fit her requirements. This revelation added another layer of horror to an already disturbing case. How many other young women had Yu Jong contacted? How many had come close to becoming victims before Hannah ultimately became her target? The platform's records might contain evidence of a much broader scope of predatory behavior than what had initially been discovered. The evidence of multiple contacts also supported the theory that Yu Jong's targeting of English tutors was specifically motivated by resentment over her own linguistic deficiencies and the opportunities this had cost her. Her rejection from the golf caddy position due to language skills, combined with her apparent jealousy of Hannah's success and capabilities, painted a picture of someone whose crime was motivated by both curiosity about killing and specific resentment toward people who possessed skills she lacked. Several criminal psychology experts who studied Yu Jong's case offered a disturbing alternative theory about her motivations and statements. Professor Kim Jae-ho suggested that Yu Jong might be a pathological liar whose every statement should be viewed with suspicion, including her claims about being motivated by curiosity about murder. According to this theory, Yu Jong's entire narrative about wanting to experience killing, her claims about true crime obsession, even her apparent jealousy of Hannah's life, all of it might be elaborate fabrications designed to provide understandable motives for an essentially incomprehensible act. The professor suggested that the only statement from Yu Jong that should be taken as fact is that she killed Hannah. Everything else should be considered potentially false. This theory is particularly unsettling because it suggests that we might never understand why Yu Jong actually committed her crime. Her real motivations could be completely unknowable, hidden behind layers of deception that are impossible to penetrate. The human need to understand criminal behavior, to find patterns and explanations that might help prevent similar crimes, runs up against the possibility that some acts of violence are essentially random and inexplicable. Another criminal psychology expert, Dr. Lee Min-jung, suggested that society's eagerness to accept Yu Jong's explanations stems from our collective need to believe that such crimes have understandable causes. We want to believe her reasoning not because we are gullible, Dr. Lee explained, but because otherwise the message would be that no one is safe from such random types of murder and monsters, and that is more terrifying. This observation touches on a fundamental aspect of how society processes and responds to violent crime. We create elaborate theories about media influence, social isolation, mental illness, and other factors not necessarily because they adequately explain criminal behavior, but because they provide the illusion of understanding and control. If we can identify the causes of violence, we can theoretically prevent it from happening again. But the possibility that Yu Jong's crime was essentially motiveless, that she killed Hannah not for any reason we can understand or address, but simply because she wanted to and was capable of doing so, challenges our fundamental assumptions about human nature and criminal justice. It suggests that some people might be dangerous for reasons that are completely beyond our ability to predict, prevent, or even comprehend. The aftermath of Yu Jong's arrest had significant impacts beyond the legal proceedings against her personally. The taxi driver whose instincts had led to her capture became an unlikely figure in the case's resolution, though not one who sought or welcomed the attention that followed. On June 8th, the Busan Police Department attempted to give the taxi driver an award for his role in solving the crime and potentially preventing future murders. However, the driver refused to accept the recognition and subsequently quit his job entirely. According to his colleagues, the experience had left him deeply traumatized and fearful for his own safety. The driver had reportedly been hounded by media outlets seeking interviews and had become convinced that accepting public recognition would make him a target for retaliation if Yu Jong was ever released from prison. Given South Korea's history of sometimes lenient sentences for violent crimes, his fear that she might eventually be freed and seek revenge against him wasn't entirely unreasonable. This aspect of the case highlights the often overlooked impact that violent crimes have on peripheral figures who become involved through circumstance rather than choice. The taxi driver had simply been doing his job when his instincts told him something was wrong, and his decision to trust those instincts had ultimately saved lives. But rather than being able to feel proud of his contribution to justice, he was left living in fear of potential consequences. The tutoring platform that had facilitated the connection between Yu Jong and Hannah also faced significant scrutiny and criticism in the wake of the murder. While the platform had extensive verification procedures for tutors, checking their educational credentials, academic performance, and background history, they had no similar verification process for the parents and students who used their services. The fundamental asymmetry in their security model became glaringly obvious after Hannah's murder. Tutors were required to provide detailed personal information, transcripts, and verification of their identity and qualifications, making them easily identifiable and traceable. Meanwhile, anyone could create a profile claiming to be a parent seeking tutoring services without providing any verification of their identity or intentions. When confronted with criticism about this security flaw, the platform's response was essentially a shrug of corporate indifference. "We get it," they acknowledged, "but because we cannot verify parents of the students in the app, what can we do?" This response demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of their responsibility to protect the safety of their users, particularly the tutors who were providing their personal information and often meeting strangers in private settings. The platform's unwillingness to address these safety concerns led to a significant exodus of tutors, who decided that the risk of continuing to use the service outweighed the potential benefits. Many deleted their profiles entirely, recognizing that the platform's business model essentially made them sitting ducks for anyone with malicious intentions. Unfortunately, Yu Jong's crime wasn't an isolated incident in South Korea's tutoring industry. Research revealed a disturbing pattern of similar crimes targeting tutors through various platforms and apps. In December 2022, just months before Yu Jong's attack on Hannah, a man had impersonated a high school student to lure a female university tutor to his house with the intention of sexually assaulting her. Even more disturbing, in 2021, another man had used a similar tutoring platform to kidnap a university student who worked as a tutor, holding her hostage for an entire month while subjecting her to repeated sexual assaults. The fact that these crimes were occurring with some regularity suggested a systemic problem with how tutoring platforms were designed and regulated, rather than isolated incidents. The pattern of these crimes also revealed something troubling about how predators were learning to exploit the tutoring industry's structure. The combination of detailed personal information about tutors, private meeting locations, and lack of verification for clients created an almost perfect hunting ground for people with violent or predatory intentions. The broader implications of Yu Jong's case extend far beyond the immediate tragedy of Hannah's murder. The case has sparked intense debate about social isolation, mental health services, media influence, and the responsibilities of technology platforms in protecting their users from harm. Some experts have pointed to Yu Jong's extreme social isolation as a warning sign that society needs to do more to identify and help severely disconnected individuals before they become dangerous. The fact that she was able to exist for years without meaningful human contact, while displaying clear signs of psychological disturbance, suggests failures in multiple social systems that might have intervened earlier. Others have focused on the role of technology in enabling both extreme isolation and potential violence. The same digital tools that allowed Yu Jong to research murder techniques and disposal methods also enabled her to exist without normal human relationships. The question of how to address this balance, maintaining the benefits of digital technology while preventing its misuse, remains largely unanswered. The debate over media influence continues to rage, with some pointing to Yu Jong's true crime consumption as evidence that certain types of content should be restricted or regulated. However, this argument faces the fundamental challenge that millions of people consume the same content without ever committing violent acts. The problem seems to lie not in the content itself, but in how certain individuals process and respond to it. Perhaps most importantly, Yu Jong's case serves as a stark reminder that evil can wear the most innocent face imaginable. Her ability to deceive Hannah, taxi drivers, store clerks, and everyone else she encountered during her crime demonstrates how effectively dangerous people can hide their true nature behind carefully constructed facades. The image of Yu Jong bouncing through the streets with her suitcase full of human remains, looking for all the world like a cheerful teenager heading out on a weekend trip, will likely haunt everyone who has seen it. It represents the terrifying possibility that the most dangerous people among us might be completely indistinguishable from ordinary, harmless individuals until it's too late. As this case continues to work its way through the South Korean legal system, the questions it raises about human nature, social responsibility, and public safety remain largely unanswered. What we do know for certain is that a young woman with enormous potential and a genuine desire to help others was brutally murdered by someone who saw her not as a human being, deserving of life and respect, but as an object for experimentation in the experience of death. Hannah's story serves as a reminder of the value of the life that was lost and the importance of remembering victims as complete human beings, rather than simply plot points in criminal narratives. She was someone who loved learning and teaching, who wanted to make education fun and engaging for her students, who was working hard to build a successful life and career. Her murder represents not just the loss of one life, but the destruction of all the positive impact she might have had on countless students and families over the years. The most fitting tribute to Hannah's memory may be the ongoing efforts to improve safety for tutors and other service providers who make themselves vulnerable by meeting strangers in private settings. While we cannot bring her back or undo the horror of what happened to her, we can work to ensure that future potential victims have better protection and that platforms facilitating these connections take their responsibility for user safety more seriously. Yu Jong's case will likely be studied by criminal psychologists, law enforcement professionals, and legal experts for years to come as they try to understand how someone so young could commit such a calculated and brutal crime. Whether we ever truly understand her motivations or develop effective methods for identifying and preventing similar crimes remains to be seen. What we can say with certainty is that this case has forever changed how many people think about personal safety, social isolation, and the potential for evil to hide behind the most innocent appearances. The lessons learned from Hannah's tragic death must not be forgotten, and her memory deserves to inspire ongoing efforts to protect others from similar fates. Stay safe out there, trust your instincts like that taxi driver did, and remember that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply pay attention to the people around us and speak up when something doesn't feel right. Hannah's story may be over, but the work of preventing similar tragedies continues. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.